We are super excited today to have Derek Lynn in the house. Derek is the Manager of Information Security. There we go. Manager of Information Security at Logix Federal Credit Union. And Derek just has a long history in security. He's actually even a published author and is just doing a lot of forward-thinking, innovative things within his domain at Logix. And we just really wanted to feature him. We wanted to really get into his brain and understand how he's thinking, why he's thinking, how he is, and how he's addressing some of the security challenges that he sees. And obviously, and you'll hear this from Derek, he really has a mission to share this information with his peers, that are walking around and having security knowledge ourselves really doesn't do the industry any good. That those things that we learn and those things that we implement, we really want to share. And it's awesome because that really dovetails into DataEndure's mission as well. So Derek, welcome. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Kirstin. It is my privilege and honor to be here with all of you.
Great. And we also have here with us, as always, Shahin Pirooz, who is DataEndure's Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Security Officer.
Hi, everyone. Derek, it's awesome to have you here. I always enjoy our conversations. It's always fun to speak to a practitioner, but you've got so much experience and background in this space that you always bring nuggets and great stories. So it's always fun speaking with you.
Well, why don't we kick it off? Derek, tell us a little bit about Logix. Tell us a little bit about maybe your organization, but the credit unions as a whole, and just kind of where you've seen over the last few years, maybe the threats and challenges that really led you to embrace some of the things you have recently.
Absolutely, Kirstin. And let me just start by saying that I wish I had known DataEndure years earlier, because that would have saved me so much time and effort. But to kind of go back a little bit more, Logix Federal Credit Union started as Lockheed Federal Credit Union, serving the employees of the aerospace giant Lockheed, which is easily recognized as a household name. And because the credit union industry went through many changes, many regulatory changes, at one point the charter was opened up to the community at large, and people who were then eligible to join Logix, to join Lockheed Federal Credit Union, but felt that because they were not affiliated with Lockheed, that they did not qualify for membership. And that was the reason why senior management decided to make a name change. This change was made quite a few years ago and actually worked. The credit union has been expanding rapidly ever since that time. We're just right before the $10 billion milestone in terms of total assets, and we're slowing down the growth intentionally because there's a whole bunch of other regulatory requirements that come into play once you cross that threshold. Now, in the growth of this organization, there's been growing security challenges as well. When you become a bigger target, you have to learn to bring a bigger shield. So in that quest, I've been looking around for different solutions, and it was my very good fortune to encounter DataEndure, who provided me with all the protection, all the teamwork, the partnership that I was looking for.
If you remember, I was wondering if we can share with the listeners a little bit about the aggressive timeline we had to deal with, and how we were able to jump in and help with that.
The urgency on my side, as you alluded to, was that I was looking to complete PCI DSS certification within a compressed time frame. Specifically, I had about 3 months in my project timeline that I wanted to get that done. Now, I was familiar with the process, so I had a good idea what was required, but the consulting firm that I was working with at the time, they quoted from their perspective that it would take another 1.5 years, which I did not have.
Just to jump to the punchline for the listeners, we were able to work together and bring in a third-party partner of ours to get the readiness and the audit done, and also some of the remediation all within that 3-month cycle so that we can get Derek's goal met. And I think we stayed incredibly in budget. I don't think we went very far over at all. So it was a successful project all around, but we certainly appreciate the opportunity to step up and are grateful that we got to bring in the right people to make it all happen for you so quickly.
Absolutely. And I should also mention that on our side, prior to meeting DataEndure, we had already gone on 2.5 years of preparation, preparing the infrastructure for the many pieces that we were going to need. So it was overall a 3-year journey for us. You guys came in the last part of it, and the overall budget was roughly 1.6 million. The overall budget actually was able to come in tens of thousands of dollars under that. And a big part of it, hopefully you and I will talk about, has to do with DataEndure NDR as a solution.
Yeah, on that point, one of the why don't we shift to that for a second? One of the key drivers for getting this done, or one of the key components that were required to get this done, was microsegmentation within your environment. And one of the advantages that our advanced security services has is we have, in most of our services, 30-day onboarding guarantees. With this particular one, NDR, network detection and response, we had a 90-day onboarding guarantee, which fit very nicely in that, one quarter timeline you had. And so one major component, the core foundation of the platform, is really a microsegmentation solution. And so in order to hit that requirement and segment out the in-scope equipment, we decided that the NDR solution would be the fastest way to accomplish that. And we rolled that out, and only for the in-scope infrastructure. And then obviously we can expand on that. It works so well, I love that old Hair Club for Men commercial. It works so well, I bought the club. So we expanded it. We expanded it to more of your infrastructure after the project was finished.
Yeah, there are many more implications of that, all positive for Logix Federal Credit Union. But just to go back a little bit, the necessity of having microsegmentation, that's actually one of the requirements of PCI DSS. In order to be certified, the network of the organization must be microsegmented. And to step back even a little bit further from that, when we're talking about financial institutions that have something to do with credit cards, banks, credit unions issuing credit cards to members or customers, it is contractually required for those servicing organizations to be PCI DSS compliant. So this is stepping back to all the different requirements that lead up to today. And there are various ways and shortcuts and workarounds. But when we talk about microsegmentation, that's a big topic by itself. Even if you weren't a financial institution needing PCI DSS, segmentation is just a good idea. And later on, when we pivot to defending against different kinds of attacks, microsegmentation is an excellent defense against all kinds of hacking attempts, because the idea is that you're limiting the damage or the scope or the extent of possible penetration. So I'm going to pause there because, I can then go on for another couple of hours.
No, I think that's a pretty healthy topic for us to talk about. We have one of the main reasons we implemented the NDR platform as part of our security portfolio was because we saw that the security ecosystem has been shifting more and more to acronym changing, meaning they don't change their services or products or capabilities, but whatever new acronym comes out, they jump on the bandwagon and say, we are it. And XDR was the most recent of those.
Right.
All the EDR and MDR players jumped out and called themselves XDR, and all they really did was pull in some telemetry from firewalls and potentially Office 365 and maybe email, maybe not. But they really didn't do much else. All of their response capability was still at the endpoint. So I like to call them EDR plus XD. not XDR. And the XD for me is the extended detection, but there is no response in that extended detection.
That's right.
Where we believe the ecosystem, in any case, take us out of the picture, where we believe the ecosystem needs to be, and just stepping back one second, every major breach that made cybersecurity something relevant and something we all had to worry about, starting from the target breach, the foundation underneath the surface of that breach was they did not have proper segmentation. The hacker, once they got in, was able to freely move around their network. And that's really the biggest problem. Is everybody talks about attack surface, but they don't talk about there are multiple attack surfaces. The first attack surface is email. The first layer of defense has to be there. Once people get past that and they do phishing and they get credentials, the next attack surface is getting into your network, and that comes through multiple paths. It may come through VPN, it may come through your endpoints, it may come through a compromised system that's carried into the office. It's many different ways for that compromise or that attack surface to expand. But the problem today is the attack surface is expanded to homes, because right now at this moment, we had a small COVID outbreak at our office, so we jumped back, and everybody's back in the home office this week, but for to make sure nobody got sick before Thanksgiving holiday. But the attack surface is now not just the office or the corporate infrastructure. It is wherever your users are. They could be in Starbucks, they could be sitting at home, they could be sitting in the corporate office. And where the microsegmentation solution came in is we felt that in order to bring a proper security portfolio to market, we had to be able to do detection and response at email, at DNS, at endpoint, and at network. And NDR, along with our ZTNA offering, allows us to do exactly that. It extends the segmentation down to a host as opposed to being network-based or hypervisor-based or cloud-based.
Yeah. I would even go so far, Shahin, as to say that microsegmentation is going to be an absolute requirement down the road. And the reason why I say that is because if I were to hack into an organization, I try different avenues, different vectors, and I succeed at one of them. The very first thing that I do when I gain access is that I run my pre-prepared script. That script sets up a whole bunch of alternative entry points. And every time I move about within the environment, I set up more. So previously, I uncovered one entry point, but by the end of the hour, I've got dozens. Okay. So with that being the case, and this is typical of the playbook for hackers, when that is the case, it makes microsegmentation all the more important. You want it to be that no matter how many different avenues people set up, they're always finding themselves very limited. When they're able to succeed and come in, it reduces the amount of work that you have to do to block them and root them out. So that's critical. That's going to be crucial down the road.
Agree. 100% agree. Let's move forward past the implementation and the positives or benefit of the platform. But I think we had a couple of great use cases where as soon as we implemented, we were able to quickly identify and squash some potential risks in the environment because of the platform. Can you talk a little bit about that without sharing too much information?
Absolutely. I can definitely be very transparent. Part of it is the big news items that we have all seen in the security world, and that's about the MOVEit exploit. And I want to say that I think, the NGM hack has had more press, but that's limited to that industry and was based on social engineering, basically resetting the two-factor authentication of admin personnel. So that's a completely different case. I want to talk about something that's more general because the MOVEit hack, it's the biggest one of the year because it's impacting all kinds of different organizations. Any organization that has the need to move data from one point to another, using Progress MOVEit as a means of doing that, or hires a vendor that utilizes the same tool, they're all vulnerable. As of September, as of a couple of months ago, the number of victims had already gone over 1,000 all over the world, with over 140 in the United States. In the couple of months since that time, we've added a few more hundred to the roster of victims, including the state of Maine. So this is a serious issue. I think we haven't seen the end of it. I think using the past as a predictor for the future, when we get to the end of the year, we're going to see even more. We may be hitting 1,500 victims all over the world. That is very significant. Even as of the month of September, IBM estimates that the overall cost of this particular hack had gone to the $10 billion mark. And that's because when you multiply the number of victims and the millions by the average cost per leak, per compromise, which is, I think, pegged at a little over $100, you get to that big number. So whatever Shahin and I can do to advise people to better protect themselves, especially with this particular solution, is going to be a great benefit. So I think, Shahin, I would suggest that we get a little further into the technical details. When people hear about microsegmentation, I think they appreciate the overall concept of dividing up the network, isolating it, partitioning it off, but they may not necessarily be very clear on the different ways that they can accomplish that objective.
Yeah, absolutely. At a high level, I think part of the reason, Derek, we were an interesting matchup for you was that it wasn't just tools we were selling. In fact, we weren't selling tools. We were selling a platform that included technology, OEM technology. But one of the things we do on the back end is when we see indications of compromise like MOVEit or like the other hacks, for example, in the MGM hack, there was the hackers had built their own third-party authenticator, which acted like Okta. And so there's fingerprints of those things within the environment that we can look for based on the post results that come out of the FBI and the incident responders in that event. So one of the things we do across all of our platforms is we take indications of compromise for incidents that we've dealt with and incidents that are out in the wild and the public has dealt with, and new emerging incidents that the world is sharing from a sharing perspective. And by the way, we're huge advocates of sharing information. That's what helps us all stay protected. But we take those indications of compromise and we build them as correlation rules and detection rules and try to make sure we have blocks and policies in place to prevent things like that. So I can't say with 100% certainty that somebody on our services will not be hit by something, but I can tell you that we have a much higher likelihood of identifying an attack early because we have the indications of compromise already built. A lot of the vendors themselves attempt to do what I'm suggesting, but they can't cover all the different telemetry that comes in from multiple customers. So they only can deal with their tool. And so as long as that indication of compromise raises its head on their platform, then they can in fact say something. But with our portfolio, we're able to put those indications of compromise, even if the vendor doesn't, in multiple tools, and be able to pull together very quickly what we see as an indication of compromise that looks like a threat, because we didn't bounce off one cell tower, we bounced off 3 cell towers and can triangulate quickly.
That's right. And then let me also kind of step back and talk about the crucial role that DataEndure plays in all of this in the security landscape. Of course, there's going to be people looking at this exchange and thinking, well, why don't I just go to the original source? Why don't I just get this particular tool and I can just do it myself? So I want to talk about the value that's being added here by DataEndure, which in my opinion is actually indispensable. Now, as you pointed out, different sources, different manufacturers, different companies will switch from acronym to acronym. The new 3-letter buzzword that is now representing a brand new technology, but it's actually just a rebranding of some very old-fashioned ideas. And this is, of course, a very good way to get people to whip out the checkbook and say, oh, I gotta get that. XDR, you say? Okay, well, I never heard of it, so I need to get it. It would be a company like DataEndure who would give prospective customers and as well as your existing customer base, you will look at them and say that, well, look, this is actually the same thing. We're in a position to provide you with the solution for particular types of problems, and DataEndure is also integrating multiple different tools that complement each other to be able to do that job. So rather than for people to kind of stumble around in the dark, exploring different combinations, I think there's a case to be made for going with someone who's already done that work and can bring to them a complete package so they can rest easier, so they don't have trouble sleeping at night worrying about what's the next hammer that's going to drop on them.
It's very well said, Derek. Thank you for that. I kind of actually a couple of weeks ago, Kirstin and I were talking, and I likened us to the AWS of security. We've really taken, people don't think anymore when they're building infrastructure on AWS, whether it's Kubernetes, they think of EKS or ECS. They don't think about what database they're running on. They think about RDS. They don't think about what server hardware they're using or architecture they're using. They think about the size in terms of compute and memory and capacity and storage. So all those factors, and then they start thinking in context of, what is the SLA associated with the speed and performance of disk that I need for the different tiers of data. Similarly, what we've done is we've taken, and AWS does this under the surface. They take commercial or open source products and they make them multi-tenant and large scale. We've effectively done the same thing from a security tools perspective. We've created a subscription-based security platform that customers can consume and grow and scale to many hundreds of thousands of nodes, where it would be very difficult for any one organization, unless you're that large, to be able to do what we've done.
Exactly.
Oh, I was just going to kind of build on that and something Derek was saying, right? If we look back at the market you're in, Derek, the industry you're in, federal credit unions, from what you've shared with us, while you want to try to punch, as you said, punch above your weight class, in some cases you're competing with banks. In some cases, they're organizations like yours that really have a growth mindset, right? And you are trying to forward think, whether it's protecting your member data or making sure that you have the right things in place for future compliance that you're going to have. There are other credit unions out there that maybe they're not feeling the pressure, or maybe they don't have the expertise. What you just described is, well, that puts a credit union in a tricky position, because grasping around in the dark to try to find the right solutions that may play well together isn't going to get them where they need to be faster, or even maybe securely, because if you make the wrong choice, it's the wrong choice. And I'm just curious, as you think about your industry and your peers, you've said in several calls that we've had that you really kind of treat this as a public service announcement. You really want people to understand why you need to think different about security. First of all, why you need to think about it, and then why you need to think different. And I'd just be curious, this is your industry, and security is your jam. What do you have to say to your peers about all of this?
Yeah, Kirstin, thank you for that. I put myself in their position. I think of myself, way back years ago, before the beginning of this journey, and I try to imagine, well, what kind of questions are they probably asking right now? And when we talk about credit unions and even banks, in my attendance of recent security conferences, I've encountered many of my peers from the financial industry. one thing that I came to appreciate was just how many small banks and medium-sized banks are out there. Not everybody is Bank of America, not everybody is a Chase, and so on. And everybody has the same concern. Everybody has similar questions. Like, hey, and Shahin was talking about infrastructure and architecture. Now, Shahin was looking at it just now from more of a cloud-based perspective, but the same can be said for what we were talking about with microsegmentation, with defending against threats like MOVEit. It's for many of the smaller organizations, it's much more immediate. It's like the concern right now, like they're still happening, there's still incoming attempts to compromise various servers. So even if I just apply the latest patch, what if something else happens, or I forgot something, I overlooked something? Then how do I further protect myself? So I think, my biggest advice to them is to get very specific on the implementation of that microsegmentation as maybe the next step for them, or perhaps a brand new initiative for 2024. That's how important I think it is. So I would I would suggest that Shahin and I can talk about the different ways that people have done microsegmentation and why it is so much better to go with the solution that we eventually settled on, as being much faster, much more agile, much more cost effective.
That would be great to understand a little bit about that, because I know, you had mentioned the journey that you were on, your 3-year journey, and how, it really was a journey where, maybe a wrong turn and over a hill and off the road a little bit.
Exactly.
You have said, if I knew then what I know now, what would be the key things that you would share with someone that you do know now to help make that journey go easier, especially because folks may not have the same expertise that you do, to be able to really drill down and understand it the way you do.
Sure. Let me talk about what I thought and then what Shahin said that eventually led us to this point in time. So I was looking, so imagine 3 years ago, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm looking at the PCI DSS requirements, I'm reading through them. I'm making mental check marks on, okay, we have this, we don't have this, we have this, we don't have this. Then I come to microsegmentation and I realize that, well, yeah, this is something that I've been wanting to do for quite some time. So typically, so at the time, I had 2 different thoughts in mind about microsegmentation. At the time, I was the senior information security architect at Logix Federal Credit Union. So I was responsible for the infrastructure, the architecture, the planning of that, the evolution of that. And I knew that we had a essentially flat network, that if somebody was to gain access to the, get past the hard and crunchy exterior and come to the soft and gooey inside, they would basically be able to roam unrestricted. So that wasn't a happy situation. How do we change that? Well, one way that I could do it, if I had a time machine, was to travel back in time. When you have a greenfield opportunity to design a data center from scratch, you can be much more wiser and smarter, and then design it with a whole bunch of segments. And you can do it based on hardware. You can do it based on router and switch configuration. It calls for a lot of planning. There's a lot of complexity. The trouble with complexity is that it has to be thoroughly documented, because a lot of people that follow you and try to maintain the structure will be lost. So I know Shahin came from a similar background. I myself have built data centers before. I had done a lot of networking construction, design, architecture, and so forth. And I knew that if I were to start doing the subnets and the VLANs and so forth, it would be messy, and there would be many opportunities for making mistakes where things just don't work and you have no idea why, because it's buried underneath the complexities. Another way to do microsegmentation is with a virtualizing solution. To kind of keep it at the simple level, this will be using something like VMware NSXT, which is you take this flat network and you impose a virtualizing layer on top of that. And it's really cool. It's really neat. You can specify virtualized IP addresses per application. And the IP addresses can actually be similar. You can have a whole bunch of 192.168.11, and then that can be reiterated without conflicting because the underlying physical IP is different. The virtualized IP may be the same. That's another virtualizing solution that also has a huge cost in complexity. Somebody needs to understand that and maintain it. Now there are two things to understand. Someone has to understand the underlying physical actual IP addresses, then understand the overlaying virtual layer that virtualizes everything into nice different segments and partitions. So I was actually going down that direction because the network had already been built. I can go back in time and unbuild it and rebuild it from scratch. So it looked like the virtualizing solution was the only path for me until Shahin came around and said, no, no, no. You can do logical segmentation. So it was as if a light bulb went on. And Shahin further explained, this will be application-centric. Think of it as a application-centric firewall, where from the perspective of the host or the application, you determine who should and should not have access to you, to yourself. That forms this logical segmentation of the allowed and disallowed. You do that for all of the critical applications of the enterprise, and without having to go through the trouble of virtualizing IP addresses, you end up with a very nice segmentation that you can control all from one place. So let me go back to Shahin on that, because I think he probably has a lot more to say, provided the high level. But I can see the gears turning in Shahin's mind.
No, I love having you're echoing my thoughts perfectly. So thank you for that. But I would say that that actually those thought processes, you're right. We had very similar experiences, and those thought processes are what led us to develop the NDR solution we did. We, not only myself, but we as a company, DataEndure, have built a lot of data centers, have built a lot of segmentation projects. And there's a common joke in the industry that segmentation projects are where CISOs go to die. And I didn't want to go die somewhere in a corner. So I had to figure out a better mousetrap for this thing. And the conclusion after doing a ton of research, and this is where some of the value that we bring to the table is, we're doing all of the shootouts, the research, and the understanding of how technologies work together, what the integrations are. And part of what I struggled with is I can't dictate to all my disparate customers across 23 countries and 5 continents, this is the network stack you have to use. I can't dictate to them, this is the hypervisor stack you have to use. I can't dictate to them, you have to use this cloud, not the other two. And the types of segmentation are those 3 that I just mentioned. They're either traditional network-based VLANs and firewalls and routers, they're hypervisor-based, or they're cloud-based. Problem is, when you start moving infrastructure into and between those 3 different architectures, you now have to figure out how to make those different segmentation solutions work together and replicate segmentation policies that extend to cloud, that extend to hypervisor, that extend to bare metal. And all those things really just honestly gave me a headache. And I said, I can't figure out an easy way to solve this, until I came across this notion of host-based segmentation and the idea of what I like to call network feature virtualization. And this actually started for me back in 2015, when I was creating at a different company a cloud migration platform, and had the same problem. How do I take the cloud on-prem and replicate it, the full cloud stack, the segments on, and back then it was as simple as DMZ, application tier, and database tier. How do I replicate that in a cloud architecture when I migrate a stack of servers? And I had created this concept of an app stack. And the app stack was pointless without the network stack that went with it. And that challenge led me to this notion of, at the time, a very new concept of network feature virtualization. And network feature virtualization was so new. There was 30 companies trying to figure out how to do it, and they were all different. They were all making mistakes. And when I came across the technologies that did host-based segmentation, it occurred to me, this is how we create network feature virtualization. We can effectively create, just like the hypervisor did for the physical infrastructure, a network layer that's running on top of whatever physical network is underneath it. The network itself becomes just a medium. And then above that, you have the firewall rules and policies, you have the routing rules and policies, you have the blocking, you have the policies for who can access what. So all the ACLs and everything, NACLs, ACLs, everything then become policy-based that stick with the server no matter what infrastructure it's running on. So now you can move it from on-prem to cloud, from cloud to physical, and the policies, as long as you have a mechanism to move it between those things easily as a lift and shift, stick with the server and nothing changes. So that construct is really what, when Derek and I had a conversation so long ago on that beach on a log, that was really the conversation that led us to, this might be an option to get the microsegmentation project for Logix done within the time frame expected.
Yeah. And Kirstin, you can tell, Shahin and I have already gone 3/4 of the way through the hour, and we're not close to running out of steam. So with the remaining 15 minutes, I want to suggest the practical implications of having microsegmentation established and how we were able to leverage off of that to defeat a new novel attack like the MOVEit exploit without specifically looking for it, without specifically defending against it, gives us the confidence to know that not just MOVEit, but other similar types of attacks that we will encounter down the road, we have an excellent way to defend against them. I think that would provide the most value to the people who may be looking or listening to this.
Absolutely.
Why don't I, Derek, lead into just a quick example we ran into across many customers, and then we can leap off of that to the example that you have, and you can add some color to it. If you all remember, the Log4j attack or incident, compromise, if you will, came out and everybody scrambled. It was like year Y2K again. Everybody scrambled to get Log4j out of their environment or block it or upgrade it or do whatever they had to do it. Our customers that were on the NDR stack, we were very easily able to use a query, like an OS query-like functionality to every system that ran Log4j, and then based on that query, put a policy together that said nobody's allowed to access this process. And within about 15 minutes, Log4j was not a problem to those customers because nothing, even if they wanted to, could access that process because the policies go all the way down to the process level, not just the network and port. So,
absolutely. And later on, there was also the Springforce shell. That's a whole other TED Talk.
Exactly.
With Log4j, at the time, I didn't know DataEndure at all, so I had to deal with it in other ways. Luckily, I came out of a programming background as yourself, so I had done Java for a number of years. I knew there was a reason why I didn't like the Java runtime. So this gave me ample excuses to kind of diss that platform. But no, I love Java. But basically, it was once you understand the working, how the problem manifested itself, it was extremely easy to figure out which machines had the problem. You just had to look at the Java version, and you can write a very quick script to detect that. And people came up with those scripts right away. You can run that in your Linux server, identify, talk about whether that is or isn't vulnerable to that. And same with Windows machines. And with Windows machines, sometimes flag that is still vulnerable, even though you've already taken action on it. And the reason why was because tech support personnel not really knowing any better, they drag and drop the runtime to the trash can, but then they don't empty the trash can. So the script will still pick that up. That was the reason. Now, anyhow, what you're talking about, the solution, DataEndure NDR, being applied to that is so much better because we ran into a situation where we have vendors using the outdated runtime and they were slow to get that updated because they have built code, they have built their application on top of that. They weren't confident that if they were to advance or update the runtime, that the code would still execute okay. Were they dependent on some outdated library routines that call the runtime in specific ways? They wanted to test and make sure that wasn't the case. Theoretically, for our computer science students, you would say, oh, everything should just work. But then in real life, when complexity creeps in, these routines call one another. It takes time to untangle them and to figure out exactly where everything goes where. That's where the challenge was. So these vendors were reluctant to update the runtime. In the meantime, they were still vulnerable, but then they needed to keep that application going because it was in production. So what would be the solution for that? Well, something like DataEndure NDR would buy them a lot of time. In fact, as much time as they needed, because all the access to that application will be from authorized machines, sources, source IPs that can be validated. So to me, I think back in those days, that must have been a godsend to your customers to be able to have the luxury of time to address the issue. Give those vendors proper time to debug their code, to update to the newer version, and not be in a rush.
Exactly. Yeah, the process level policy is probably one of the key distinct differentiators in the platform over other segmentation solutions and even other host-based segmentation solutions, because a lot are focused on the network. The people who develop them come from a network background, but these policies allow you to say that this individual process running on this other server is the only process that can access this process running on my server. And so you can literally get it granular enough to say that only the Tomcat process on server X can get access to the Log4j process on this box and nothing else, as an example.
Yeah.
So that was really helpful, and it was a godsend. Perfect words. I like to call it an unsung hero. We didn't realize it was that good until it was. But yeah, you had other similar things that came out in your environment, which was, like you said, a 0-day not advertised and identified by the deception platform.
Exactly. And something that I haven't shared with you yet that I'll talk about now is that first of all, when we realized that there was this huge problem that was being reported all across the world, certainly here in the United States, we knew that we had to do something quickly. Now, the troubling thing that I discovered later on was that this organization, Logix Federal Credit Union, we're sitting behind a fleet of next generation firewalls. These firewalls should have the ability to do real-time inspection of network traffic coming in or going out. And they talk about how this particular inspection is artificial intelligence powered, or what they call machine learning driven. Okay, that's great. It looks really good in a marketing brochure. But at the end of the day, what happened was that the attackers who wished to exploit the vulnerability in MOVEit servers went past these next generation firewalls to be able to access those servers directly. So I'm going to be investigating why that particular defensive measure did not react and take action or send alerts or block that particular attempted access. But in the meantime, we talk about defense in depth. So the next generation firewalls, I hope that's not the only layer of defense. For us, very fortunate, we had already deployed the DataEndure NDR client on all the machines, including all the servers, including the 3 MOVEit servers that we had. So this is the other point that I wanted to make, is that even organizations that did not employ the Progress MOVEit product, they were compromised because they hired a vendor. They worked with a vendor that used it. Now, we don't just work with a vendor that uses MOVEit, we use MOVEit ourselves, and we've been doing it for decades. So we are more of a direct threat. We are more at risk than these indirect victims of the MOVEit exploit. Now, what happened was that because the clients were in place, it readily identified the incoming attempts to access the MOVEit servers as being unauthorized, not permitted. And we logged those IPs, and I was able to chase them down. What I found, those IP addresses, there were 2 major categories. Number one, attackers come from hosts, web hosts. This could be US based, based out of Europe, other parts of the world. These are hosting providers who did not police their customers. So a black hat hacker could just rent out time on these servers, oftentimes very inexpensively, and then use that as a launching base for their attacks without revealing their own personal IP address that they're operating from. That's one scenario. Another one was that multiple companies seem to be coming out of a CDN, and that's because these companies themselves have been compromised previously. Hacker had gained access to them, but decided to use them as a resource, as launching platforms for further attacks. Those were the 2 big categories that reveal themselves in the IP address analysis of the source of these attacks. There was even one particular source of attack that did not belong to either one of those categories. It actually belonged to a security company based out of Michigan. So my first thought was, hey, is this security company compromised by the hackers? How ironic would that be, right? So make a long story short, further investigation revealed that no, they were on top of their game. They knew what they were doing. They were not compromised. What they were doing was using the hackers' tools to probe around to look for potential customers because they are a security company. They wanted to then contact the affected company and say that we've detected that you guys are vulnerable. Here's proof.
Wow.
Now, you need to hire us to help you out with that. Now, as a point of business advice, don't do that as a marketing campaign, please. Security companies out there, it's a very bad idea.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't care the reason for which they were trying to compromise our servers. I blocked them all, not just in DataEndure NDR, but also went back out to the firewalls and blocked them there, so they're doubly blocked. And that's how we were able to utilize NDR to protect ourselves against what is really a grave threat to many industries, not just the financial industry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
well, just your ability to go so quickly, to go so deep and expansively, to really be able to figure out where the threat is, what's being impacted, and shut it down. Just seems like it's been transformational for you.
Can take credit for that. I have an incredible team, great people that are working really hard, and they love what they do. And partly it's reflected in their partnership with the DataEndure team as well. And we can tell that you guys at DataEndure, you guys love what you do.
We do indeed, and I think you've said it multiple times through this, but as we're coming up to a finish, I think it's probably important to highlight the importance of defense in depth. It's not a new concept. Derek, you and I have been dealing with it for 30 years. but it's becoming more and more a concern because there's a lot of vendors out there that are saying, if you use our XDR solution, you don't need anything else. And, buyer beware to the listeners out there. There is no such thing as one tool that will solve all your security problems. Not the best gen firewall solutions, not the best network detection and response solution, not the best XDR solutions. You need to have a full portfolio that covers all of the attack vectors and is backing each other up so that you can have this conversation and comfort and peace of mind, as Derek did, to say, here's what happened. They still got in my network, even though we have very expensive, best-in-class firewalls at the front end, but our next layer of defense stopped it.
Correct. Shahin, another important thing that I want to highlight is that as we look out across different industries and look at all the professionals out there in the security world, not all CISOs are have a similar background as yourself. You've done programming, you've done software, you've done hardware, you've done on-prem, you've done cloud. You have a wide range of practical hands-on experience. I want to point out that's relatively rare. I don't often come across people with that range of experience, even at the CTO, CIO, or CISO level. So if there's anyone listening where that resonates, I want to say that it's much more important for them to work with a company like DataEndure that can complement them by bringing that set of skills to the table, so that with a rapid response that I know you guys are capable of, with the ability to advise in a very pragmatic way, like, this works, that's marketing fluff, that's hype, but this right here, this is the real deal. I think that can do a world of good.
Thank you for that, Derek. I couldn't have said, other than the compliments, I wouldn't have said those. I appreciate that. I couldn't have said the rest of it better. I think the where we strive and we want to be there to help our client base is exactly what you said, to complement what they do today, to enhance their security posture, to make them be able to focus on their business and differentiate against their competitors. So do what you set out to do, not the stuff that is becoming commodity but hasn't quite become that yet.
Right. Well, I know we're at the top of the hour. Derek, we just thank you for your time. Do you have, just as a quick wrap up, is there any statement, advice, final thought that you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Well, I think, first of all, I want to thank you for putting this together. As you can tell, Shahin and I always have a great time when we talk about this stuff. I think, we are probably too geeky, too nerdy for our own good. So we appreciate this opportunity. The one final note that I have is similar to the message that I sent to you guys through Michael, and that is, at the end of the day, it's all about partnership. And I was asking Michael if he could use maybe a graphic from Toy Story, howdy partner. That's the way that I think about that. That's the way that I think about DataEndure.
We feel the same way, Derek. Thank you.